Welcome to Season 7 of True Blue Conversations with your host, Adam Bloom. Real talk with those who pledge to keep us safe with grit, sacrifice, and determination. Let's get on with the show. This episode of True Blue Conversations is proudly brought to you by Loudon Private Wealth, the team trusted by professionals, veterans, and families across Australia to build real, long-term financial security. If you want to take control of your finances, protect your future, and build real generational wealth, Loudon Private Wealth are the people you want in your corner. They don't do gimmicks, they don't do hype, just smart strategy and honest advice, coupled with real-world experience. Check out the links in the description to contact Warren and the team via loudonpw.com.au or 02 8313 0418. Now let's get back to the show. This episode of True Blue Conversations was brought to you by Dead Reckoning Rum, creating individual rum releases commemorating the diggers lost in Afghanistan, proudly supporting veterans, donating 50% of all their profits to veterans organisations around Australia. Look up Dead Reckoning Rum, buy some bottles, connect via Instagram and Facebook, and give them your support. Now, let's get back to the show.
G'day, welcome back to True Blue. Today, I have a very special guest on, and you've all seen the movie Black Hawk Down. Well, I've actually got one of the pilots who the movie is loosely based on, and we're going to get into that with him today. And so today I'm joined by Mike Durant, and Mike's going to talk about his life before Black Hawk Down and the movie and what actually happened on that day in Somalia in 1993. So, Mike Durant, welcome to the podcast.
Pleasure to be here. I enjoy our brief chat we've had so far. I look forward to furthering the discussion.
No, it's an absolute. I grew up watching that movie, and you know, you've become an icon, and I've ordered your book, mate, and I'm about to read your book, and just to sit across from you it's a pinch myself moment to go, wow, I'm actually talking to Mike Durant. So, Mike, before we get into what happened in Somalia, let's go back to a young Mike growing up. What was life like as a young fella? Were you good at school, and do you have any brothers and sisters? And talk me through life before you joined the military.
Yes, I grew up in a pretty small town in northern New England. You know, nothing really extraordinary about me as a young person. I played sports. I did pretty well in school. I sort of lost my motivation in high school. Again, you know, why does that happen to some of us? I don't know. You know, I probably had more potential than I realized in high school, but I just didn't try very hard. In the end, I guess it didn't hurt me all that much, but I played hockey. I skied. I did a fair amount of hunting, snowshoeing. I played a little bit of football, American football, a little bit of baseball. So it's sort of a lot of different things, and not really great at any of them, but I did okay. And I think the main thing is just getting out there and doing it, and being in a team environment. Those to me are very valuable life lessons, and you don't realize it at the time when you're a kid. You just you want to go do it, but in the end it was I think very beneficial for me to do all that. I really didn't have any desire to go on to college because, again, like I said, I did fairly well in school, but I didn't really put my full effort into it, and wasn't really sure what I was going to do, and was fortunate to go on a helicopter flight with a friend of the family when I was a teenager. And I would say, we all have these sort of major turning points in our life. And I would say that for me was a very significant turning point, because I was just amazed by it. Not everybody has a chance to fly in helicopters. If any of your listeners ever do have a chance, take advantage of it, because it's a magical experience. It really, really is. And, we're hovering over the highest mountain in the northeastern United States, a mountain called Mount Washington. It's over 6,000 feet tall, and we're in this sort of like fishbowl, right? I mean, mostly glass cockpit. And I mean, I just couldn't believe it that this is potentially something I could do as a profession. And the guy I was with was a military helicopter pilot that had his own business, and this was one of his aircraft. And he saw I was interested, and I actually got to work with him over the summer, doing a variety of odd jobs, and it sort of ignited that. I don't know if I'd call it a passion, but it was a very high level of interest in aviation from that point forward.
Mm.
And who knows where I would have gone had I never gone on that flight, but it certainly motivated me. And he explained that if you join the military and you do well enough, you can get this training as part of your military service and do that as a job. And again, to me, that was mind-boggling coming from this small. Our town had a paper mill in it, and a lot of people ended up working there, which is fine,
Mm.
but it's not what I wanted to do. And this to me was just this amazing opportunity that I just sort of made it my goal to find a way to get there. And when I first talked to the military recruiters about getting in the military, they told me I couldn't go straight to flight school, which is not all, whether it was true at the time is hard to say, but there are situations where you can go straight to flight school. But anyway, I was told I couldn't. And so I joined anyway with the goal of applying for flight school while I was in the military, and did that and was successful and went at a pretty young age. I went to flight school when I was probably just turned 21.
Yeah, right. So and Mike, it's interesting because you're going to be the 160th episode that I've released, and it goes,
Oh, really?
yeah. So it's like you were in the 160th, and you're going to be the 160th, and I think in all those episodes that I've done, Mike, it's literally been the same. It should have applied themselves, and with all the veterans and first responders I've spoken to, it seems to be the same. If applied, could do better, and it seems that you were the same through school, but you seem to, and every guest I've spoken to seems to find their way once they get to where they want to get to. And did you have any family members that had served before you, or are you the first?
Yeah, I actually did. In fact, most of my uncles and my father either served on active duty or in the National Guard. So the National Guard for us is it's a state-run part of the military, and you're not full-time active duty unless you get deployed. So they would have uniforms on once a month when they went to do their drill, and but I wasn't exposed to it every day. So and during that time, our National Guard had not been deployed like it
Mm.
has been during the last 25 years. So, in terms of true appreciation for the military and what it means to be deployed, and at the point of the spear, I really had not been exposed to that, but I had been exposed to the military.
Mm. So you mentioned that you joined in 1979, and that back then the Vietnam War had finished, so it's peacetime army. It's not you're not at war, which in coming into the future after 9/11, to be your busiest time, but it was busy during your time up in a few years, go forward, but. Back then, you join up, and was it everything you thought it would be when you joined in 1979?
No, not at all. I don't know what I expected basic training to be like, but I was absolutely miserable. And again, I, I'm not really sure what I expected, but what it was a bit of a shock to the system for
Mm,
me. I had a pretty good childhood and teenage years, and life. I didn't realize at that time, but really life was pretty good for me. And now all of a sudden I'm in this pretty extreme environment, I would say, based on what I experienced up to that point in my life. And I thought I'd made a mistake, honestly. And then fortunately I was in pretty decent shape because of the sports that I had played, and did well on the physical fitness part of basic training. And the drill sergeants, tried to focus on that, and convince me that, you know, this is this is just temporary. This whole basic training thing, this is it's not going to be like this for the rest of your career, and to give it a chance. And yeah, it completely turned around.
So before you could go to flight school, you do a defense language course and you end up joining and assigned to the 470th Military Intelligence Group. Was that sort of just a stepping stone to get you to into the flying?
It was. I mean, the only reason, and it was a decent job, and it was, a pretty interesting profession. I'm not sure I would have wanted to do it for my whole career, but we were listening in on various countries in Central America, and my job was to find these, radio transmissions and type up a summary of what they were saying, which is why I went to language school, and then send it on, and we're recording it, and then if it's of interest, then the analysts would actually go back in and translate it in detail. So I'm sort of like the point man that's trying to find this stuff. And if it's of interest, highlight those interesting aspects of it and then pass it on to someone else. It was kind of cool. There's a lot going on in Central America. Most of it was high frequency transmissions, which travel quite a long ways. So, we're listening to countries, 1,000 miles away because we have this big, gigantic antenna array that we're sitting in the middle of when we're doing these intercept missions. So, it was okay. And Panama was an interesting place to be assigned, but the brass ring, I guess you could call it, was always flight school. And if I had not been accepted to flight school, I probably would have got out of the military.
Mm. Well, for what would happen going forward in your career, and you start that process, and talk me through that transition from being an intelligence where you were to then go into flight school. Was it a hard transition and learning, to become a pilot?
Well, there's parts of it that are hard, and I think it's different for everyone. Some of us are more inclined to learn the academics part, and some maybe are more inclined to get the physical control of the aircraft part. I was fortunate in that I sort of had a really good foundation in both. Again, I've always felt like once I got into the cockpit, that's where I belonged. I mean, it felt good to me. I had good, what we call situational awareness, which is really important because,
Mm.
it's more than just looking at the needles or the gauges in the cockpit. It's, having a complete understanding of what's happening in your macro environment. And, as the missions gets more complex, that gets harder and harder because it's not just you. It's the ground force. It's your other aircraft on the mission. It's fixed wing aircraft. It's, fires and everything else that's going on. So, I was blessed to be put in a position that I felt comfortable with, and I did pretty well in flight school. And it's amazing training. I mean, it lasts almost a year, and they take you from never having moved the controls in a helicopter before to being fully qualified and ready to go out there and serve the nation. So I was, again, it was the realization of what I had hoped to achieve, and I think that's what's great about our country and our military. If if you take advantage of these opportunities, the opportunities are amazing,
Mm.
just absolutely amazing.
And Blackhawks they were coming in and new, and that was the goal to get onto Blackhawks, which you would eventually do. And what was that like the first time you saw the Blackhawk, and what was the first time, getting in that seat and, feeling the controls, and as you said, you sort of felt at home. Was it like, yeah, this is it. I've found what I want to do for the rest of my career?
Oh, for sure, yeah. I remember the first time I saw a Black Hawk. I thought it was the coolest looking aircraft I'd ever seen, and I still do. I mean, they still look amazing even 50 years later. It's just a fantastic aircraft, and obviously proven capability with. I mean, every service in the U.S. military uses them. They're operated by probably at this point 30 countries around the world. There's thousands of them in service, and it's just an amazing machine. And the first time I got in it, it was like, wow, this is like flying a spaceship. I mean, it was, again, in the 70s, if you think about what cars looked like in the 70s, you had a regular, speedometer with a needle, right? And if you look at what a new car today looks like compared to what a new car then looked like, that's kind of the difference between the helicopters that I had been flying to now a Black Hawk. It's got digital instruments, it's got colored strips, nothing too sophisticated, but certainly at the time it was probably state of the art. And I don't know, it's just so fortunate to there was only one slot in my flight school class for Blackhawks, and I got it.
Yeah, right. And is that so once you get assigned to Black Hawks, Mike, is it pretty rigorous training to then learn the machine and get comfortable? And how long before they say, righto, Mike, there's the keys to the there's the keys to the Ferrari, off you go.
Yeah. Yeah, the scary part is it's not a ton of training. The flying hours are very expensive. So there's a lot of academic training and there's a lot of simulator training, which are all very valuable. I think I had flown the actual aircraft thinking 25 hours,
Wow.
which is not very much,
No.
before I went to Korea. And when I got to Korea, I was the first Black Hawk pilot to get there. They didn't even have the aircraft yet. So I ended up being one of the more experienced guys with 25 hours in the aircraft. So, when you're put in situations I would say at the very limit of your capability, you mature pretty fast or something bad happens. Unfortunately, I developed pretty fast and got a ton of flight hours when I was in Korea because of that position that I was in. They made me a unit trainer, which had me teaching people how to fly along the demilitarized zone, which we had to memorize. And, the Korean Peninsula is pretty wide. And you had to memorize the whole thing so that you could fly it without a map. Because, the worst thing you could do is cross the border because the North Koreans are going to shoot you down if you do that. And that has happened. So in a medevac unit like I was in, that's our area of coverage. So we may get a call to go fly to a location to pick up someone who's injured or needs transportation to a medical facility, and not a lot of time to plan the mission. So it was even more critical that we know the terrain so well that we're not going to overfly the demilitarized zone.
So you're over there in Korea and you're doing these medivacs. So is that every medivac has its challenges and to get in and but it was good training, and as you say, 25 hours, Mike, is not a lot of training. Like that's not many hours at all. Like I think back to when I was driving a car. 25 hours, like that's not a lot of, and flying is hazardous and it's dangerous as and you've lost mates over the years. Yeah, that's not a lot of training at all and not a lot of hours.
No, for sure. Well, and just to be clear, it's 25 in the Black Hawk. Total time when I got to Korea was probably 200 hours. So I had,
Right.
175 in various types of. The way we do it is you start out on a basic, at least the way it was done back in the 80s. You start out a very basic aircraft, and then you progress to a more complicated aircraft as you learn different phases of flight training. But then the way it was done at the time, the Black Hawk training was done after flight school, and that's where I got those 25 hours.
Yeah, right. And so and how long is that deployment when you're in Korea for?
Normally, for somebody like me we call it unaccompanied, not married, it would be a year. But I really appreciated the amount of flying I was doing and the quality of that flight experience. So I applied to extend, and I stayed another 8 months and ended up being there for 20 months.
Yeah, right. And so a lot of flying hours by the time you get back. And where does the 160th Special Operations Group come in? Had you heard about them, Mike, or had you seen them? Like, where does this come into your path of then joining the 160th?
So it was literally in a bar. We're sitting there in a dark bar having a beverage, and this guy starts talking about this unit that he knows about. At the time, the existence of the unit was not publicly acknowledged. So, no one knew about it. There were sort of rumors and rumblings, but it was all hush hush. And, that made it all the more interesting to me, right? Tell me more. And I can't remember if he had assessed and didn't make it, or, just knew somebody who was in the unit. But anyway, once he started talking about it, and the missions and the customers and the equipment and everything else, to me, that became the next brass ring. I sort of accomplished what I initially set out to, and now this is another level, and was very, very interested in joining the organization.
So you put your, is it a transfer, Mike, that you put in to join the 160th? And then do you have to go through a selection process to go, yep, righto, Mike, yep, we're going to accept you? And do you then have to go on and do like training to become part of the unit?
Yes, both yes to everything you just said. There is definitely a selection process. You have to show up, and you do a physical fitness test, a swim test, the psychological eval, a flight evaluation. I mean, you name it. It's pretty comprehensive. I have no idea what the percentages of people who make it, but a lot don't,
Mm.
because it's pretty difficult. And then it's at the end of all that, you are boarded, meaning you go into a room with a bunch of 160th people in there, and they ask you questions, and the whole idea is to make you uncomfortable and see what really makes you tick. And I got through all that and got into the unit in August of 1988, and that then begins about another year of training, because you have to go through what we call green platoon, which is just a higher level of physical fitness, life saving, small arms training, land navigation, all sorts of different training requirements that sort of build on what you learn in the conventional army.
Mm.
And then you got to learn all the mission equipment that is in the aircraft. I mean, when you look at a picture of the aircraft, of course, with the Venezuela mission, there's a lot of pictures out there right now of 160th aircraft. But if you can tell just by looking at the airframe, there's stuff all over this thing that
Mm.
is not found on conventional aircraft. So you have to learn all that, and then you have to learn the tactics that are used, which involves shipboard landings, it involves fast roping, it involves just all sorts of different things that you probably were not exposed to in the regular military, and a lot of land navigation or flight navigation.
Mm.
Because the main mission, I mean, there's, obviously there's aerial gunnery and fire support, but the primary mission is to get our customers, the way it's referred to now, is to the X, meaning where they want to go on time. And there's no excuse for failing at that. So there's a lot of emphasis on, day and mostly night vision goggles, getting them, where they want to go when they want to be there.
And when you do this, this hard training, and then you get into the 160th, and does your mindset change, Mike, when you're around these elite guys, and you're pushing the training to like as you say, you're pushing it to the edge because you're surrounded by these guys that are wanting to push themselves to be better?
No question about it. I mean, absolutely no question about it. And this is not being critical or, sounding holier than thou compared to the rest of the military, but it's another level. I mean, it's like the difference between the minor leagues and the major leagues, right? I mean, it's just, it is really the best of the best. And then, you combine that with, these missions are so high profile and so highly visible, that it just puts this burden of responsibility on you to be as, the best that you can possibly be, to avoid, anything that could ever be remotely associated with, some sort of failure.
So you finally get into, after your training, into the 160th, and then you deployed to, and this is where, as we said at the start of the podcast, where you joined in peacetime, but this is where it really starts to ramp up. And now that you're part of the, Special Operations Group, you deploy to the Gulf, then you deploy to Panama. And you'd obviously, as you said earlier in the podcast, that you deployed to Korea on the medevac side of things, but this is your first operational deployment. What was that like when you got over to the first Gulf?
Yeah, as you described, it's really peacetime military, but it wasn't for us, and
Yep.
it really never is for the special ops community. On a typical day, we've got people in 80 countries around the world, and that's sort of been a consistent number over the years. That's about how many places we have people out there doing real world things. And yeah, in 5 years, I really did four different combat deployments with multiple missions on each one. So it was everything I hoped it would be. I mean, there were guys who had been there for a while that never went out on a real world operations, the way the term we use, and now all of a sudden, bam, 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 they're coming back to back, and that's that's really what we hope for. It's we're not warmongers, but you know that if we're going to get deployed, there's a need, there's a political need, there's a military need to do whatever it is we're being called upon to do, and that I think we all really are honored at the fact that that responsibility is being put on us.
Mm. I think most veterans say, Mike, you train for the grand final and you want to deploy and playing the big dance, and that's exactly what you join to do and go on adventure. And as you say, you're not hungry for war. You just want to do your job, what you train to do, and you're in a highly elite unit that you want to put your skills to the test, and you did that. And did you have any close calls and but like we're going to get to Somalia in a minute, but did you have like during Gulf and Panama, did you have any close calls and w did any Blackhawks go down in that time before Somalia like that, and did you lose mates?
Yeah, I mean, lots of close calls. I mean, and we were flying on the edge. I mean, that's just the way it is. And yes, I did lose. We lost people in our unit on every real world mission I was on, except Prime Chance, which was the first one in the Persian Gulf. The guys in the bed next to me were lost in Desert Storm, extracting some Delta Force operators from Western Iraq that had gotten injured. In Panama, it was a little bird guy that I'd gone through Green Platoon with. They were shot down, and both pilots were killed. And then, obviously, in Somalia, multiple losses. So, yes, and I guess what that does is make you realize that even more than you probably knew going in, there's a fine line between, as I refer to it, being on the wall, meaning the memorial wall where your name's on the wall,
Mm.
and surviving your career. And is there luck involved? Yeah, I mean, there's probably some, but there's certainly a boatload of skill and doing your job the way it has to be done to be successful that gets you through all that.
Mm.
And so there was no time where you thought, oh, this is just a cakewalk and we're just going to go punch a ticket here. It's even just training. I mean, when you're flying night vision goggles, low level, bad weather, there's, you name it, there's so many hazards out there that can come into play.
Mm.
And that's why, accidents happen. And I think what most people don't realize, though, is the sheer volume of missions that are accomplished successfully compared to the ones that are not. It's sort of like aviation in general, right? If you look at the U.S. commercial aviation industry safety record, it's mind-blowing. I mean, to think so many aircraft with so many people take off every single day, and we almost never have major incidents. The
Mm.
last one probably being the midair with the Black Hawk last year. It's incredible, but because they're just such high profile events and there's usually so many lives lost, it gives people this perception that this is a dangerous profession. But in reality, you're more at risk driving your car down the highway than you are flying on a commercial plane. So
Mm.
it's it's dangerous, but if you do it correctly and everybody's trained and executing to standard, the odds of something bad happening are pretty low.
And I know myself, Mike, because I winch in and out of helicopters I'm a firefighter over here, so I know the risks, and every time you go up, it's literally as the pilot, you become part of that team, and you're looking out going, yep, there's a bird there, or there's this or there's that, and there's always that risk, and a lot of people, like I know when you get on a commercial plane, I listen because I fly a lot winching in and out of helicopters. I listen to the brief of what the what the crew are telling you, because it's life and death. It can save your life, and you see it so much where people just are on their phones and it's like, hey, you actually should be paying attention to this, because this could save your life in a emergency situation. And as you say, flying is very dangerous, and you throw in now, and we're going to get to Somalia in a minute, where you've got, RPG missiles coming at you. And so 1993 happened, and, the deployment spun up. How did you know that you were going to be deployed on Operation Gothic Serpent, and how did you get over there?
So initially, the mission started out as a very small, low-profile operation. And there were only a handful of people that were involved, and I was actually not involved initially. And we were going to go in there under the cover of darkness and actually use assets that were already in country to apprehend Mohammed Farah Aidid, who was the leader of the Haber Getter clan, who was the primary target. To me, that was the ideal solution, and it's unfortunate that during that planning period, we never got the notification to go forward, because I think it would have been pretty successful, and Black Hawk Down never would have come into existence. But it's not what happened. Things continued to spiral, and delays occurred, and finally, as it evolved, the mission planners got to the point where they thought, no, we need a full deployment package here, and that expanded the number of personnel from, I'm going to just use an estimate here and say maybe 50 initially to 400. And, we've got now more than 20 helicopters. We have a whole company of Rangers from 3rd to the 75th Ranger Regiment. We got Delta Force, a few SEAL Team 6 guys sprinkled in there, some Air Force Special Tactics. And now we're conducting rehearsals over the summer of 93. And it's a lot more complicated mission now, because we have all these aircraft, but it gives you more capabilities. There's sort of pros and cons to this. And as we reached the point where we were mission ready, the president got briefed. And I don't know who did the briefing. I wasn't physically there. All I can tell you is from what I have read, the bottom line on the briefing was the chance of success of this operation was 1 in 4. I don't agree with that. I think the chance of success is probably 90% at that point still, even with a large force of aircraft. But the president says, well, if that's the best you can do, then we're not going to go. So we had done all this planning and preparation. We're at Fort Bragg with our customers, and we get told mission's a no-go. So we disband. And I personally had flown to Texas with our aircraft to participate in a training exercise out there. And, at the time we were primarily moving our assets by C-5, which is the large transport plane flown by the U.S. Air Force. And we landed, started offloading our aircraft, and I don't remember, but it was certainly within 24 hours. We get told, no, things are spinning back up, go back to Fort Bragg. So we load the aircraft back on the C-5, climb back aboard, fly back to Fort Bragg, and now things are accelerating quickly. We do a couple more rehearsals, and really the catalyst was that the Somalis had blown up a Humvee, a U.S. military ground vehicle, and killed all 4 soldiers on board. And that, sort of took the aggression of the Haber Getter clan to a new level. And that's when we got the green light to go. And so we deployed. We ended up getting there, I think, on August 18th, I think it was. and we were mission ready pretty quickly because we'd already done all the rehearsals. And initially, our mission was to capture Adid alone. He was the only target. And, the problem with these types of situations is very similar to bin Laden, is you don't know where they are. I mean, you got intel that suggests they might be here, they might be there, but they're not, it's not solid. So we would call it chasing Elvis, meaning, Elvis Presley, everyone talks about Elvis sightings over the years, right? So that's why we made that reference, which is still used today, as I understand it. But, so we're going to go chase Elvis. And we did 2 or 3 missions in that phase where we're after a deed, and we're playing our hand here, and the intelligence was not good in any of those. Fortunately, we executed all the missions without taking any losses. But now the Somalis have seen, okay, this is how they're doing this, and it gave them an opportunity to figure out ways to counter our tactics, which in the end is what causes so much loss on October 3rd. So our leadership said, hey, look, we're spinning our wheels here a little bit. Let's go after his infrastructure. So we moved to phase 3, I think it was called, where we're after a group of 50 people that were within the leadership of the Habergetter clan. And our mission is capture these people and then turn them over to the United Nations for trial. They had been stealing the food from the starving people of Somalia. Which is really the primary issue here. There's rampant starvation. Hundreds of thousands of people had died of it, and these warlords are stealing the food that's being donated to stem the tide of starvation. So our job is to take those warlords out so that the relief organizations can get the food out to the people who need it. And so in phase 3, we did a number of missions, all of which were very successful. And we ended up capturing close to 30 of the individuals on the list, including the number 2 guy. And for those who have seen Black Hawk Down, the number 2 guy is portrayed in the movie. He's the guy smoking the cigar, acting kind of cocky. That's Osmond Otto. He was not cocky, I can tell you, because, I was on all these missions. And he didn't ride on our aircraft, but I landed next to the bird he was on when he was taken from the back of the aircraft, and he looked anything but cocky at that point. And it's in some ways it's unfortunate that we didn't stop right there, because the belief was without Osmanato, who was financing everything, Adid would have probably become powerless in a very short period of time. But that wasn't our mission, and we don't make those calls. Our mission was capture these 50 guys. So we capture him, we turn him over, and we go on to more missions. On that Otto mission, the Somalis started to fire rocket-propelled grenades at us. So we're monitoring how this threat is evolving as these missions are progressing, and we're not ignoring it. We're discussing how significant is this threat. What do we do to protect ourselves? The most basic thing is fly at night, which we wanted to do when we could. But sometimes when you're chasing people, you have to go in the daytime or you don't go. That's your option. And the Otto mission, for example, was a daytime mission. We went after him twice in the daytime. The first time we missed him because he walked out of the compound, and the second time we got him. And then on October 3rd, obviously, that's a daytime mission. And that contributed significantly to the losses that we took.
So I'll just go back. Before you deployed, Mike, you had been on operational deployments with, Gulf One and Panama. And did you, and, the life-changing, and we're going to get to October 3rd in a minute, and the life-changing day for you when your Black Hawk was hit and, you were shot down. And did you feel that, okay, yes, we're going on, flying, as you've said throughout the podcast, it's dangerous. Did you feel that, this deployment was different and that what would happen, that you would, be shot down and you'd be held captive, if you had a crystal ball to see what was going to happen? But did it feel different before you deployed?
There was only one time it felt different, and I can't explain it. I still remember it distinctly. It was when I first got called in to go to Fort Bragg for the first time. I was driving down the highway after leaving my home, and I don't know, it felt different. I just remember seeing some kind of a bird in a tree. It wasn't an eagle. But it was a large bird, and for whatever reason, it caught my attention, and I just thought about, sooner or later, if you keep doing this for a living, you're probably going to experience something pretty challenging. And, maybe that was the moment where I started to realize that I had slight bit of vulnerability. You have to have the confidence that you can go do what it is you're being asked to do. You really shouldn't be doing it.
Mm.
But every once in a while, I suppose it's just human nature to say, this is dangerous stuff that we're involved in, and maybe this one I'm not going to be so lucky.
And yeah, unfortunately, you weren't, you were shot out of the sky. And mate, talk me through that day, October 3rd, 1993. You were there. It was and we've seen it portrayed in the movie, but you lived it, mate. Let's talk through October 3rd.
Yeah, so it's a Sunday, and we were going to do a training mission the following day. People who aren't in the military, don't understand the military, might not realize that even when you're deployed in combat, there are certain skills that you're not utilizing every day, and you need to go train and remain proficient at those. And I've been fortunate to be part of an initiative to weaponize the Black Hawk as an attack helicopter, and we had all those assets with us, but we hadn't gone out there and done aerial gunnery with them since we'd been there. So we were actually planning a range for that coming week where we were going to go shoot rockets and minigun, and I'm pretty sure that maybe that was all we had at the time. And so I'm at the operations center sort of figuring all this stuff out when the call comes in that there's a mission developing. And what had happened is, there are two senior Haber-Getter leadership at a meeting place near this Olympic Hotel, which is a pretty recognizable feature in the middle of the city of Mogadishu. And it developed so quickly, I didn't have time to run back to my bunk to get some of my gear, mainly what's called a kneeboard packet. It's sort of like a notebook that sits on your leg that you can refer to for mission frequencies or call signs or procedures or certain things that, it's difficult to commit all that to memory. And I didn't have time to go back and get it. I mean, this thing just spun up really, really quickly. So, the good news here is I've done this now with training and actual operations. I've probably done it 30 times. So I'm pretty familiar with how this is all going to go, and not having my kneeboard packet wasn't all that critical. And my co-pilot, Ray Frank, was going to have his anyway. So I'm not that worried about that. We get the quick details. The way we try to do this is we want the mission plan down to everything except exactly where we're going, because that's the part you don't know, right? Where is this person going to be? But everything else is already planned. So once you know where they are and where you're going, it's just it's administrative at that point. Here's how we're going to approach them from this direction. Everything else is the same. Everything else is the same as we practiced every time. So run out to the aircraft. The crew's already getting the bird ready. Jump. Brief them, because they don't know. They haven't been involved in where we're going or what the target is. So I give them all the information. I'm the flight lead on this. So that means I'm leading one element of this mission. And our element, it's actually the largest element on the mission, is to block the target. Put assets on, it's not always four corners, but in this case it was. Put a box around the target so that we can keep support for the enemy from getting in, and then also keep people we're after from getting out. And we're going to follow as close as we can the assault force that's going to hit the target, and then we're going to come in right behind them and secure the perimeter. Sorry, I'm getting a call there.
You're right, mate.
It's mid-afternoon as this is all spinning out. I think we hit the target at like 3:18 in the afternoon, something like that. Really bad part of town. There were four things about this mission that I would say probably created some cause for concern. Number one, it's daytime. Number two, it's in the worst part of the city. This is where all the bad guys hang out. So they got all the reinforcements right there. We can't land the Blackhawks because the streets are too narrow. Some parts of the city we could land, but right around this target the streets are too narrow. So we have to fast rope everybody in, which is fine. But how do we get everyone out? So the decision we had made was to get everyone out by ground vehicle, which is why the convoy is part of the story here. And the fourth high risk factor was this is the seventh mission. So as I said earlier, the Somalis have had time to see how these missions go and to figure out, well, these rocket propelled grenades that we have that we didn't think we could use shooting at aircraft on day one, we've now determined can be effective against aircraft at the target, because when we're at the target, we're stationary. And they reach all these conclusions, and then they figured out how to control movement on the ground by using obstacles and burning vehicles. They had developed their own communications net where they could broadcast to all their supporters that this is where the target is, and everybody flocked to the target, which is why we ended up fighting so many people on that particular mission. So all these things were developed over time by the enemy. I think everyone that's in the military and plans missions like this knows, like in sports, your adversary is not static. They're not just going to keep doing the same thing over and over. They're going to adapt, just like we have to adapt. So you have to be one step ahead of them. And it's sometimes it's hard to do that. And in this particular case, there wasn't a whole lot more we could do to put the advantage on our side. We're trying to use speed. We're trying to use violence of action where bang, we get everybody on the target, we shock and awe, and then we minimize time on the target and get everybody off. But the things they had done to prepare kind of rendered some of that less effective, I would say. So anyway, the infiltration goes okay. A couple of small things happen. We did have a Ranger fall from one of the aircraft in my flight. Todd Blackburn's his name. He was hurt pretty bad. So that's the first casualty that we're going to experience on this mission. We'd had some casualties on other missions. But, that happens even in training. So the mission's going to go on. We're going to get Todd out of there, and we're going to continue to prosecute the target and then get everybody off. I would say the next major milestone in this operation is the loss of Super 6-1. Super 6-1 was flying in close proximity to the target, doing a circular pattern. They had shooters on board that were providing, very, very close-in fire support that you really couldn't do any other way. But in hindsight, it's probably not a great way to do it because the aircraft that these guys run is very vulnerable. It's slow-moving. It's right in close. And, we're a 50-something foot long target that eventually you're going to hit. If you shoot at it enough, you're going to hit it. And Intel reported that they fired 150 RPGs at us on that mission. So with that many things flying around through the air, the aircraft are going to get hit. And 6-1 goes down. 2 pilots are killed, but they're trapped in the wreckage. Can't get them out. The ground force doesn't want to leave them. So the decision is made, look, we got people on the target, we got people in the convoy, we got people at the crash site. Let's consolidate everyone at the crash site because that's the immovable object, and then we'll extract everyone from there and end the mission that way. In the process, a couple things happen. One of our Little Bird aircraft lands. This aircraft has no crew, just 2 pilots. One of the pilots gets out, recovers a couple of the wounded Delta operators, gets them on the bird, and they fly them out of there. Incredible. Not something we had discussed, planned, briefed, and they just thought of it on the fly. We can get in quick and get out quick and potentially save a couple of lives. And then we had the search and rescue aircraft, which you pretty much put on every mission. This is a contingency asset. If we lose a bird, they're going to go in, secure the site, treat the wounded. They're put in at the crash site, and that aircraft gets shot down. And then the commander calls me and asks me or tells me to replace Super 6-1 over the target. So we're going to go in and do the same thing they were doing. Difference is we don't have shooters in the back. All of our guys that were put on the ground, but we have miniguns. And the minigun, just an amazing
Mm.
powerful weapon. And the idea here is, we'll provide that very close-in fire support, maybe not as close because, you can't shoot a minigun like you can a sniper rifle. But we're going to do what we can to keep the enemy at bay while they finish their operations on the target. Unfortunately, we're the same target that the first aircraft was, slow moving relatively, huge target, eventually probably going to get hit. And we did, and it blew the tail rotor off. I was flying, very violent. Anyone that's familiar with helicopters has probably seen videos of helicopters that lose their tail rotor. It's not a good situation to be in. A single rotor helicopter like a Black Hawk is going to spin violently at slow speeds when the tail rotor is gone or it's lost effectiveness, and ours was completely gone. And I just remember sort of being in this flat spin, realizing that I have to keep the aircraft upright or we're never going to survive. And the only thing you can do to deal with this emergency is shut the engines off, because the engines are creating the torque that is causing the fuselage to spin. So I'm on the controls, which is not where the engine controls are. So Ray reaches up and he gets the engines not all the way off. We were spinning so fast he couldn't keep his arms up to get them completely shut off, but he got them offline enough where the spin slowed down, and obviously without engines, we're falling out of the sky. And, I guess I did what I needed to do, which is keep the aircraft upright, and we crashed on the wheels. It was a violent crash, broke my femur, crushed my spine, even with all the, landing gear, shock absorbers in the seat, which all attenuate that impact.
Mm-hmm.
It was still so violent that we all had very severe injuries.
So we've seen the movie, Mike, where it all, you watch it and it seems to go on forever that, as you said, Super 6-4 is going down. And as you're saying, it's a violent, hard-hitting, which, would absolutely, and a movie can't portray of how quick you fell out of the sky. And so talk me through, you hit the ground, and how accurate were they in that movie of portraying what happened, and give me your real life perspective once you hit the ground. What's happening when you hit the ground?
Yeah, I think the one thing that's different about the real incident in the movie is, as you just described it, it seems to go on forever in the movie, and that's by design. If you talk to the folks that produce the movie, they'll tell you we can't make something happen so quickly that the audience might miss it. So they I guess you could say they delayed it or extended the sequence so that you're sort of drawn into it instead of, oh, what just happened, right?
The dramatic effect. Yeah.
Yeah. But outside of that is what happened. The tail rotor was blown off. We spun violently out of control. I made a radio call. It was recorded. I've heard it. We've lost the tail rotor. We're going in hard. And then I called to Ray, and I don't know why. I don't know whether it's because we're still spinning and I'm trying to figure out, why aren't these engines offline? I don't know. But right about that time we hit the ground, and that's the end of the recording, obviously. The damage to the aircraft was significant. It was destroyed. But we all survived the crash.
So you're on the ground, mate, and now we've seen that, the movie happens where you're injured, and they show you shooting from the cockpit. Is that accurate, or that didn't happen?
I did not shoot from the cockpit. There was nothing to shoot at while I was still in the cockpit. Time is hard to judge, so I don't know how long I was unconscious, and then it's hard to judge how long was it from the time I regained consciousness and sort of got settled and decided I was going to defend myself from I did have my MP5, which is a 9mm submachine gun, but I never fired it from the cockpit. The next thing I knew, Randy Sugard and Gary Gordon are standing next to me. And so at that point I thought, wow, there's already a rescue force here. I'm not sure how in the world that happened. And then they got me out of the cockpit and put me on the ground. And that's when I did start shooting from while I was on the ground, but not from the aircraft.
So it's portrayed. So you see that both the two Delta guys come in, and you're thinking, "Oh wow, the rescue force is here," and they're killed. And then what happens next? Are you taken captive? Like, you taken captive pretty well straight away. And in the movie, it's shown that you're hit with a rifle. Is that accurate, or was that made, like, did they add drama effect for that?
So there's a lot of little things that are wrong with the overrun sequence in the movie. They showed me in a room. I wasn't in a room. I was right next to the aircraft. They showed me looking at a picture, I think, of my family, which I didn't do, because actually that picture, which I did have with me in Somalia, was on my kneeboard. So
Yeah,
it's back
right.
on my bunk, not with me. The mob, you know, again, it's 30 plus years. It is the most terrifying thing you can imagine. I mean,
Mm.
their their reputation was not good. They had decapitated the prisoners, and I was sure that that I was about to be killed. And initially, they were sort of split between those that wanted to kill me and people that wanted my possessions. I mean, I remember when we were out in the countryside, we'd have an empty plastic water bottle that, you and I probably throw away every day.
Mm.
And for these kids, yeah, they, I mean, some of them probably never seen one before.
Mm.
So, that becomes their new canteen, right? So all these amazing things we had were very, very valuable, whether it's my boots, my shirt, my weapon, my survival gear, my helmet. I mean, all this stuff. So they're ripping all this stuff off of me. I actually had to help them get my survival gear off because we had these clips on there that you have to squeeze. They're pretty common these days, but I guess back then the only time I'd ever seen them is on a water ski vest. And Somalis don't water ski, so they don't know how to deal with these things. So they're just pulling and pulling and pulling. Then I finally just unclipped it for them to let them get it off of me. And about right after that sequence is where I got struck in the face. And I originally said it was a rifle butt, and the reason I did is I didn't want anyone to know what happened at Crash Site 2.
Mm.
It was just beyond, I mean, beyond what I could have ever imagined humans would do. And what I was struck with, I believe, I can't say with 100% certainty, but was probably the arm of one of either my crew or one of the two Delta guys, Randy Sugart and Gary Gordon. We know they dismembered people because they returned, parts of their bodies. And, it always made me wonder why no one questioned me, because if you look at my face in the interrogation video,
Mm.
if you got butt stroked hard enough where it broke your eye socket, your nose, and your cheekbone, you'd have a big old bruise the shape of that butt stock.
Mm.
But there is no bruise. There is blood, and it's not my blood because I wasn't cut on my face. So, all that points to what I thought I was is probably right. And again, it was just shocking. I mean, I was just shocked that these people were so angry at us at this point. And
Mm.
it's all just winning over the hearts and minds of the people. Folks that aren't in this business may not appreciate how significant that is, but that's really the whole game.
Mm.
You know, understanding how to control the hearts and minds of the people is oftentimes what's going to win or lose anything. And we had been less effective at winning over the hearts and minds of the Somali people than Hadid was. And you got to remember, this is '93, right? There's no internet, there's no television broadcasts,
Mm.
the only radio is his broadcast. He's broadcasting Radio Hadid, and he's telling his people that we're not there to help them, survive this drought and famine. We're there to take over the country, which is ridiculous. Why would we want Somalia? But the Somalis don't know that. They're just, all they know is U.S. military's here, Somalis have been killed, and it builds this anti-U.S. sentiment
Mm.
that now makes our mission, 1,000 times more difficult because we're fighting, everybody in the city instead of just a handful of hardcore Haber loyalists.
Mm. And for you, so what's your mindset over the next 11 days with the injuries? You said you're in bad shape with your back and you'd broken your femur. And like, are you thinking at this point, I'm going to die? Like, talk me through that mindset. And did you think, would I ever get back to America again?
Initially, I thought for sure I was going to die. I mean, when they overran the site, I just didn't see a scenario where I don't get killed here. But then it sort of becomes a survival challenge. And I had been to survival school, and it's like any other major challenge in life. You sort of got to break it in these, small pieces and not be overwhelmed by the magnitude of this challenge. So, for example, surviving at the crash site, I'm not thinking about, man, I can't survive, 6 months in captivity. I'm thinking about how do I make it through the next 30 seconds? And using some of the things that they had taught us to use in survival school, which all worked quite well, actually. And, as things settle down and you've got more time to think and things slow, then you start thinking in longer, pieces of time. Can I make it through today? And but I never got to the point where I was thinking, am I going to survive months or weeks? I was always just thinking about sort of the immediate challenges and, let's just do whatever we can do here to get through this day. And, realizing I had to drink water no matter how bad it was. I had to eat something whether I wanted to or not. I even got to the point where I was trying to do some sort of cardio, knowing that my body's just deteriorating laying here. And over time, that'll probably kill me.
Mm.
And so, just whatever I could do to make it through whatever amount of time I was going to be there.
And you see in the movie, Mike, that they say Mike Durant, we won't forget. Like, was that real? Could you hear that was like that the actual that voiceover going, we won't forget you? Like where was that true?
It was true. Yeah, the first thing was they were broadcasting songs from the aircraft, and I heard that, and then he's a very good friend of mine. In fact, he's going to be coming here to spend time with us here in a couple of weeks. Was the voice from the aircraft saying, "Mike, we won't leave without you," and I knew they wouldn't anyway, but to hear that coming from the sky was pretty powerful. And if I did need some morale support, I certainly got it from that.
Mm. And after you're held captive, Mike, are you aware that you had lost, obviously you'd lost the two Delta guys that came into, and absolute courage of what they showed to come in, two guys to get to your aid. And are you aware that Super 6-1, you knew those guys that at that point, had you realized the battle or the mission hadn't gone, it hadn't been a success, and you guys had lost so many, guys at that point, or are you just purely focused? I've just got to survive the next 5 minutes, the next day. Did you know what was happening?
Yeah, no, I didn't have the big picture. There's no way I could have had it. The only thing I knew is that 6-1 had been shot down. But in my mind, okay, they're shot down. They'll get recovered. We'll fix the aircraft. I did not appreciate the severity of that crash because I didn't see. I didn't see the aircraft going down. We were holding, because we had already gone in the target, and we were holding north of the city, maybe I don't know, 2 miles away, but too
Mm.
far to actually see the bird go down. And I'm a bit of an optimist also. So, in my mind, again, these are just things that are happening during the mission, and we'll get everybody back together and band-aid this and duct tape that and get things fixed and go back out here and do it again.
Mm.
No idea that it would eventually last 18 hours and we would lose so many people and 5 Blackhawks shot down. Just never happened before. It hasn't
Mm,
happened since. I mean, it's just never been a mission where we lost 5 Blackhawks.
mm. And talk me through that final phase of you're freed after those 11 days and you get rescued. And why do you think, Mike, they kept you alive? Like, why, as you said, they what they did to humans was terrible. Like, why do you think that they didn't, like, beat you to death? Or look, talk me through when you finally went, oh, it's over. I'm actually I got like, talk me through that rescue point.
Yeah, so I'm told that Adid had issued orders to capture an American if possible, because in his mind, that would create some sort of leverage that he could use to his advantage. And again, I'm told this. One of the people immediately around me as I'm being beaten recognized that I'm the last one alive here and fires shots in the air and gets people to back off. I can't tell you that I distinctly recall that. Obviously the beatings stopped, but I'm not sure I could tell why at the time. I just a mob of people on top of me, so I don't, I maybe couldn't even see where this guy was. But it was primarily because Adid had said he wanted a prisoner, and according to Mark Bowden, who's the author of Black Hawk Down, when he interviewed the Somalis, they said that as I'm being carried through the streets, there's another clan that comes into contact with the Deeds people and actually takes control of me, which explains some of the moving around that I did
Mm,
in that first 24 hours. And then there's some sort of negotiation that goes on between Adid and this rival clan, and they turn me back over. So again, I was moved really twice in the first 24 hours, and that kind of explains why that happened. And then, at that point, when they made the interrogation video, that served as proof of life for me. So now, not only did you have Adid wanting a prisoner, but now you've got the international community scrutinizing the actions of the Somalis, recognizing that they have a prisoner, and now they're really being held accountable for how I'm treated at that point.
mm.
So, although it didn't feel that way when I'm being interrogated, it became proof of life for me and actually benefited me and not them. And then, in terms of release, our president sent over the former ambassador to Somalia, a gentleman named Robert Oakley, who was highly respected, trusted. As soon as he came on the scene, the whole dynamic changed. I mean, it was like you went from, hostility and friction to willingness to communicate and dialogue. And he met with the Somalis. He's since passed, but I've spoken to him personally about this a couple of times. He said, I gave them two choices. I said, let Durant go or don't. And if you don't, we will eventually figure out where he is. And when we do figure that out, we're coming at you with everything we got. And, you took heavy losses on October 3rd. You're going to take even more heavy losses during this rescue, whether he survives or not. And so the Somalis realized that it was in their best interest to release me. And within 48 hours of that meeting, they let me go.
And at this point, too, like, you've got a wife at home. Like, what's she thinking, mate? And for you to, like, what was that like the first time you actually could make contact with her and let her know, I've gone through an ordeal, but I'm okay. What was that like the first time you spoke to her?
Yeah, I mean, and it really applies to my family at large. It's such a relief, and there's certainly a flow of emotions that sort of all let loose because it is traumatic. I mean, I
Of
don't know how you
course.
could go through something like that and be like, oh, no big deal. I mean, it's a big deal, and it was overwhelmingly emotional. And the things that I never thought I would experience again, I was able to experience again, and I still experience now, 30 plus years later. It's
Mm,
just a blessing. I was given another life, another chance at life, and largely due to the sacrifice of Randy Shugart and Gary Gordon, who we hadn't mentioned yet, but were posthumously awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, which is our nation's highest award.
mm,
First time it had been awarded for actions in combat since the Vietnam War. So we're talking, 25 years of U.S. history between the times where this medal is awarded for valor.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, to say it was emotional is an understatement, I suppose. And that begins the healing process.
Mm.
I think we realize now that, shedding a tear doesn't make isn't an indication of weakness. It's an
Yep.
indication of you're a human. You are grieving. I think the hardest thing for me was when I found out that Cliff and Donovan, that the Super 6-1 pilots, were also dead. Because, again, in my mind, when I'm getting reunited with the unit, the guys are all going to be there, and my crew is gone, and others are gone, but I wasn't expecting that, and it floored me that it's another two very close companions of mine lost their lives in this battle along with everyone else, and that's, I don't like the term PTSD. I know some people struggle with the aftermath of and I would say for me it was incredibly challenging, but it was dynamic and short lived. I think a lot of people struggle more with these extended periods of repetitive incidents that maybe aren't as tough, on their own, but when
Mm.
you experience them every day for a year's deployment, that has a greater toll than it had on me. I don't know. We're all different as
Of
humans, but
course.
I don't like the term. I mean, for me, I think it's grief. I think, for a year, I cried every day. I mean, I get hit by a wave. I mean, it was like, holy crap, that actually happened. These people are no longer here.
Mm.
It's just horrible, but again, I think it's part of that healing process. It'll hit me every now and then now, but not nearly as frequently as it did, in those
Mm.
early days.
And like we all like you go and like you've written your book, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the podcast, but it's you that you have that post-traumatic growth, and I really believe that, Mike, because I've gone through it myself with what I've experienced in my life, and it is you never forget it, but you process it and you have that growth, and you learn to, it's not, you never forget it, but you learn to deal with it and move forward with your life, because what other choice have you got? And you can either stay in that negative mindset, or you can choose to move forward, which is what you've done. And after you're freed, talk me through your recovery process, and the injuries, the pain, must have been unbearable, and your back was absolutely, it was in a bad way, and you'd broken your leg. So where do you go for your treatment, and then obviously you start your recovery?
Yeah, and what's ironic is that what would have killed me, according to the doctors, is actually the injury to my face, because I had an infection that had already started in the in the in those injuries, and because of its proximity to my brain, that is probably what would have killed me. And they said it probably, based on where it was when I got released, would have only taken about a month. The other major thing to deal with was my femur, because it was a compound femur fracture. So my femur went out the backside of my leg, and how it didn't cut the femoral artery, really, it's hard to explain, because I
Mm.
was thrown around, stuck in the back of cars, thrown in the back of a vehicle. I mean, I don't like to use the term miracle lightly, but I mean, it is a bit of a miracle that didn't happen. But what did happen is that my muscles started to shrink, and my femur, the two parts overlapped
Mm.
by 11 centimeters by the
Wow.
time released. So now you can't just set it. They got to put me in a traction, which they did in Somalia. So they basically put screws through my knee with this weighted system that's now stretching my muscles back out before they can even set my leg, which they did not do in Somalia. They did operate on my face, and they operated on my leg. The back it is what it is. The vertebrae are crushed, but in the end, they put me in a brace to try to straighten it out. but I've never had any surgery on it. The vertebrae are all still just deformed.
Mm.
I had more surgery in Germany, which was my first stop, and then I had multiple surgeries at Fort Campbell, which was, where I was based. And they finally put the femur rod in at Fort Campbell because it took that much time for those muscles to stretch out. And then once that rod's in, the structure's there. And unfortunately, I'd been on my back so long, I couldn't stand up without passing out. So they put me on this thing called a tilt table where they bring you part way up until your eyes start to roll back in your head, and then they put you back down. And then it's basically retraining your circulatory system to keep the blood going to your head. It's amazing how quickly the body adapts, both positively and negatively, depending on the situation that you're in. So I went through the tilt table thing, and then once I was able to stay upright for, an unlimited number of time, I could stand up. So I'm on crutches now, and within maybe hours, I think I was released from the hospital. That's when I got the unfortunate news that the Army Medical Board had looked at my back injury and determined that it was a permanently disqualifying injury, that I could never fly again. So now I'm devastated again because, here I am on the road to recovery, and I'm told you're going to have to find something else to do. And I'll take a little bit of personal credit here in that I just didn't roll over and become the victim here. I took control of my own destiny, and I started to increase the amount of exercise I was doing far and above what the physical therapist had me doing. And my goal was to run a marathon within 10 months of having that femur rod removed. And again, I think most people thought, yeah, good goal, but good luck. And I actually did do it. I ran for me, a very fast marathon, and was able to convince the leadership in the military to get me a waiver, to get me back in the cockpit. And I flew again for the rest of my career in the same unit, not operationally, because, I'm smart enough to know that you have to be 100% to be doing that mission. And I really couldn't sit in the aircraft seat for more than a couple of hours with that back injury. And, if you're distracted by all this pain that you're feeling in your back, you're not focused on the mission, which you should be. So I flew as a staff aviator for the remainder of my time, but I did stay on flight status and was, it's tremendously rewarding when you can overcome another challenge like that, whether it's administrative like that one was or not. And beat the system. And I beat the system and got back in the cockpit.
What that shows me, Mike, is, like, as most people wouldn't survive what you survived, 11 days held captive, the injuries that you sustained, and then to be told, yeah, Mike, you're not going to fly again. Like, to get back to that shows just pure determination to go, no, I'll show you. And as you said, you have run a marathon after the injuries that you sustained. Mate, most people would just curl up and go, and have that negative mindset. It just shows that mindset of you just being so positive to go, no, this isn't going to beat me, and I'm going to move forward. This is my new life. This is the outlook. And that would have been rewarding for you to go, yep, I've achieved that goal to continue to fly. Obviously not operational, which is what you love doing the most, but to still, do that supportive role, like that shows in that sense of not having that negative mindset. So well done, mate. Like, most people wouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm proud of that accomplishment. I really am. And I just ran another marathon here 30 years later, and I didn't even come close to my time from
Yeah.
1995. But
Wow.
at least I still did it. I did it again.
Exactly. And mate, that shows anyone out there that no matter what challenges that you are, dealt in life. And as you've said it, before, Mike, as well, that life is challenging. Life is full of struggles. What you've experienced, you in 1993 in Somalia, it hasn't all been smooth sailing, going forward with the rest of your life. This is just one part, one chapter, and it shows that no matter what challenges you face, you just got to keep putting one foot in front of the other, and eventually you'll get through those challenges.
Absolutely. That's if there's a message that I can transmit to anyone who would benefit from it, that
Oops, sorry, Mike. We just lost you there, actually. So I'll just get you to repeat what you just said. Oh, hang on. We've just had a bit of technical difficulties. Mike, can you hear me? Oh, what's going on? Hang on a sec. Oh,
All right, can I
I,
hear you now?
I've got you now, Mike. Yep, I can hear you. Sorry, mate. I missed what you just said there. We had a bit of a technical issue. So what you just said, mate, I missed that whole section.
So no, I guess following on to your comments about perseverance and resilience, which is the word we tend to use to describe that, is, if there's one thing I could share with people, because again, I wish I could say Somalia was the only struggle I've had in my whole life. It's not, right?
Mm,
But you have to keep moving forward. You can't just say I'm done here and tap out and give up. There's always a way to somehow move forward in a positive direction. And it doesn't mean it's going to go the way you ideally hope it will go, but you find a way and you keep moving. And if you have to find an alternate goal, then you find an alternate goal, but it's something positive
mm,
that gets you through that struggle. And that to me is the most valuable lesson that I could share with anyone. I mean, again, I said it earlier. I've had a full second life. If you look at how old I am now, Somalia was halfway.
mm,
And, it, you know, this has been a tremendous second life. I mean, there's been incredible stuff that's happened and things I still get to do, and, people I get to share my time here on earth with. And I'm just so thankful for it. And again, circling back to the sacrifice of Randy and Gary, none of it would be possible without them.
mm. And, rest in peace, those two brave men. And it's, mate, I'll go. I've got a few final questions before, and, the time that you've given me is just, absolutely amazing. And in 2001, after 22 years in the military, you discharge, and most veterans and first responders that I've spoken to struggle with that transition. How was your transition back into civilian life?
So I think I had two advantages. One is a friend of mine gave me some sage advice. He said, you got to remember when you walk out that gate, and metaphorically speaking, it's not like, we live inside a gate and then we walk out the gate when we retire. But when you walk out that gate, you have to remember that you're living in their world, they're not living in yours. You got to recognize that this is a whole new macro environment that I now have to operate in. And the things that maybe you did that helped you be successful in your old environment, maybe some will translate, but they're not all going to translate. So that's one piece. The other advantage that I had was my role in the unit after Somalia became one of developing new technology for training, or weapon systems, or other things that would, as you said, support the mission. And that exposed me to business. It exposed me to government contracting, and that whole, prior to that, I didn't care how this stuff got bought. I don't care about the contract. All I care about is when I walk out and push that button and turn that key, this machine does what it did yesterday. And the entire gigantic procurement and logistics system that exists is irrelevant to me. That was very narrow-minded, but that's how I saw the world. And post Somalia, I got exposed to all that. So it was sort of an education on what goes on within government contracting and then the entire aerospace industry. So transitioning to a role within that world was easier for me because I got that 8 years of experience, exposure, and understanding of what goes on in that world. So I'm not naive enough to not realize that I had a couple of really distinct advantages. So, what I tell people is, yeah, operational stuff is, I mean, it's there's nothing like it. It's, the camaraderie, the sense of purpose, and all of that is just, you can't match it no matter what. But as you start getting closer to that period where I'm not going to be able to do that anymore, you got to start figuring out, what can I learn now that might help me, fill a role post military service.
Mm,
And you just have to recognize that that team room feeling doesn't exist very much in the in the outside world. It just doesn't,
Mm,
and and you're gonna have to find a way to find other ways to create that. Like, for example, I mean, I started playing hockey again, after I got out of the military, and it's a little bit of that. You're on a team with a bunch of dudes and ladies that came out and play with us as well, and it's not the same, but it still gives you that
mm,
feeling of being part of something. And scoring a goal again is not like capturing a bad guy, but it's a little bit. I mean, it
mm.
feels pretty damn good,
Yep.
and so you got to find just alternative ways to get back to what it was that created that commitment and passion you had while you were serving.
Mm.
And again, you got to recognize you're walking out the gate. It's not going to be the same, and to expect it to be is just wrong.
So you transition, you move into that sort of defense industry sort of space, and in that same year, 9/11 happens, mate, and that would have what do you remember of that day and where you were? And that would have sucked because you just discharged and you couldn't be for what the guys would go through and be you couldn't be part of the campaign against the war on terror. That would have sucked. And talk me through that day and what you remember of 9/11.
Yeah, I think we all, at least certainly Americans, remember where we were. I was working, actually for a government program office at the time. We are building a new helicopter, and I was going to help figure out how to procure the training systems, teach people how to maintain it and operate it. And we were at the contractor's facility. The contractor in this case happened to be Boeing in St. Louis, and we're in their facility watching the planes hit the buildings. And all the airspace shut down, so we couldn't fly home. Luckily, we had a rental car that we were able to keep, and we ended up driving home. And I had this just distinct feeling, as you pretty much just described, of sitting on the bench. I mean, we're about to embark on, arguably the most significant thing we've been involved in decades, and I'm not there. But you also have to realize, if you notice, I wear reading glasses now. When 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 I was sitting in the cockpit one time when I first started wearing them, without them, I'm looking up at all the switches, and I can't read. It's called declamania, the words that are written around the switches. And there's a lot of switches in these aircraft.
Mm.
And yeah, you kind of know where all the ones you use all the time are, but the ones you don't use all the time, you got to be able to read it. And I got to read through my reading glasses, and I'm like, okay, if this was a civilian job, that's probably fine. But to be able to rely on reading glasses to fly operational or even as a staff guy in this unit, it's time to move on, right?
Mm.
So, you got to recognize when that is. And it happens to all of us, athletes, whatever. At some point, you can't do what you could do before, and there's
Yeah.
someone else that's more qualified than you are. And so I sort of realized that with 9/11. Yeah, I want to be there. Yeah, I could probably fill some role, but you know, there's not a compelling need for me. No one's going to reach out and say, we got to have you back. And just sort of take comfort knowing that I had done a lot of things to help better that capability,
Mm.
better the training, and all of those things. So in some way, indirectly, I guess I guess I could say I contributed in a very small. Yeah.
Absolutely, mate. And I think what it shows is when you got to the unit and when you left, the growth in, the capabilities that you helped develop and over those years. And, the 160th would go on, into Afghanistan and do many, many, many missions, throughout that time in that, the campaign on the war on terror. And it is, you leave a legacy, Mike, that, from the growth of technology from when you first got there, in 1988 to where when you left in 2001, and now I'm sure the technology's changed so much in the time since you've been out, and the time of that campaign. And you because I've had a few American veterans on the podcast, and like recently here in Australia, we just had a terrorist attack just over Christmas period, and it hurts, mate, because it's your country. Like, you think it's not going to happen in your country, and so it would have been hard, but as you say, you get to that point, everyone does, where it's you've got to move on and you can't do what you did. And eh, I'm sure, so you move into also the speaking side of things, and I'm sure you always get asked this question. How accurate was the movie, Mike, Black Hawk Down?
That is the number one question, most often asked. And I tell people it's accurate enough, meaning if you watch it, and again, I speak from the air perspective. The ground folks may feel differently,
Mm,
but I would say from their perspective, it's accurate enough. You basically get the idea. I mean, the aircraft that are shown being shot down in the movie are shot down for real. There's little things like I'm in the wrong seat. I think at the beginning of the movie, they've got Cliff Walcott and I playing some word game over the radios. We didn't do that. We had radio discipline where we didn't really communicate any more than we had to. Shooting from the cockpit. I mean, just stuff like that, right? But
mm.
big picture, it's accurate enough.
So that call, Irene, did that actually happen?
Yeah, that was the launch code word, and I probably did say, that expletive. I'm not sure if your audience is rated G here or not.
No, no,
Irene, I
you can say
probably
it. You
did.
can say it, Mike.
Yeah,
It's fine.
yeah. It's a somewhat well-known quote, but yeah, I probably said fucking Irene. Yeah.
No, mate. It's such a from a kid, like when I was a kid, it was literally that Irene, and yeah. So that's why I wanted to ask you that. And you've written a number of books, and as a fellow author myself, I know for myself it was a cathartic process to get my thoughts out. Was it the same for you? And talk me through that process of writing, because as you said at this, at the start of the podcast, you don't have that, you don't like that PTSD, label. I'll call it a label, but was that part of the healing process to get your thoughts out in become a best-selling author?
So it wasn't the motivation, but it certainly was the result. You know, when it all first happened, I mean, this was a pretty big story. It was maybe a slow news day. I'm not sure, but one example is at the time when we still printed magazines, three of the largest news magazines in the U.S. was U.S. News and World Report, Time, and Newsweek. Those three were the big three. I was on the cover of all three, and it had never happened before. So that just gives you some idea of how significant this was as a story. So I sort of realized that there's potential here for a book, but writing books in our community, it's become more accepted these days, but back then it was, I don't want to say frowned upon, but you got to be really careful.
Mm.
You obviously don't want to disclose current ops. You don't want to disclose capabilities that might be classified or sensitive. And so I basically did an outline of the book and just put it in the drawer. And almost 10 years went by. And now Black Hawk Down comes out. Not just the book, but the movie.
Mm.
And our Special Operations Command is supporting it. I mean, they gave aircraft to the producers, they gave pilots, they gave expertise. All the actors came and talked to all the people that they portrayed. We briefed them on everything. So I'm like, okay, I've had this stuck in a drawer out of concern that I'm going to talk about something shouldn't be talked about. And now, the command is totally in support of a major motion picture. So maybe it probably would be okay writing a book. So I reached out to a couple folks that I knew that were in this industry. And the other thing that happened is the war on terror had just started. So now there's this huge interest in military stories. So my timing, again, completely locked at this point, put me in a position where my story was in high demand. I mean, we had multiple bids from multiple publishing companies and, finally accepted one offer and then went through the process of actually, writing the entire book. And that's when I realized that not only was this, there was some financial gain to it, but there was definitely a healing process there that I did not expect.
Mm. And, I think most authors I speak to, that go through a traumatic event, they find it is, and I know for myself, Mike, it was the same. It was literally getting it out. And, there was times where yeah, I'd be yelling at the computer screen. There'd be times where I'd be crying. There'd be times where it was sheer joy. But it's that release of, and you know it yourself, it's that release of all getting it out, just getting those words down on paper. It can be a very powerful thing. And if there is anyone out there that, listens to this, and there'll be, thousands and thousands of people that do, it's if you are going through that, I know, Mike, you will agree with this, is get it out. Get it out, write it, so that you can process it and heal. And for you, Mike, you've survived what most people wouldn't. And what advice can you give to people who, are in that dark space and, can't see the light? You survived 11 days in captivity. What advice can you give to them to just, see that there is light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, let me say one more thing about the book. Another thing I think we've come to realize is that we have to tell these stories because if we don't, historically human beings learned through storytelling.
Hmm.
And if we stop doing it, certainly when it comes to something of significance, whether it's how it was handled from a foreign policy perspective or support of the military or tactical or whatever angle you want to take, there's tremendous value in understanding what happened. And if those of us who participated, don't ever say a thing about it, then all that knowledge is lost. So,
Mm.
and I think we appreciate that more these days than maybe we did at the time. But I'm fortunate in that, I had said it was a little touchy writing books. I did what I was supposed to do. I sent it to all of the units that were involved and asked them, take out what can't be written about. And some of it was ridiculous. Okay, I'm going to be perfectly upfront and say, okay, you want me to take that out? That's stupid. I mean, it was in Black Hawk Down. It was in the movie. It's in the news. I'm going to just leave that in.
Mm.
And I never took them in heat over that. But there was some stuff that, okay, fair enough. I'll take that out.
Mm.
And I think that helped in terms of acceptance in me writing that. But, because others have done the same and it didn't turn out so well because they didn't do that. But anyway, back to your question about getting through adversity. It goes back to what I was saying earlier. Maybe don't think about the light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe just think about how do I move forward in this tunnel,
Mm.
and just how do I take that next step in the right direction that makes me feel good about accomplishing something. Whether it's getting out of bed in the morning when and I don't suffer from this. I'm an early riser. My wife will tell you probably to a fault, in terms of how early I get up every day. I've never been one of those, I'm just going to lie in bed all day and feel bad about something. But, if you are that person, just stop, get up, go, make a cup of coffee, do something,
Mm.
go for a walk. If go for a run. I will say that, the one we didn't touch on is by running that marathon, not only did it prove physically that I could fly a helicopter, but it helped me emotionally. I mean,
Mm.
it's all tied together. If you feel good physically, your life odds are you're going to feel better psychologically and
Hmm.
emotionally. So, just find something that you can do that gets you moving in that positive direction. And then when you make that step, find another one and make another step. And eventually, you'll emerge from the darkness and find that light.
Absolutely. And I know that all too well, Mike, that, like myself, I got into the very, very dark depths of depression and wanted to end my life 11 years ago, and then saw the light. And, I've since implemented things to get me to where I am today. And it is It's exercise, it's food, it's meditation, it's my faith. It's, I go and do ice baths and people think I'm crazy, but I found what works for me, and this is the thing that you're saying is find what works for you. And you mentioned as well with the like capturing, like writing a book or capturing these stories. It's why I do the podcast, Mike, because we're capturing history. We're locking it into history because, you know, we go back to World War One, we go to World War Two, and World War One, we especially, we look at it now and go, oh, geez, we were very late to capture that history of what happened, and this is why we do the podcast, mate, because we're capturing history, and it's for your grandkids, it's for the future generations to understand, and especially over here in Australia too, we have it where Vietnam veterans, it's a struggle to get them on, Mike, because of the way they were treated back in Australia, and they just will not come on. And I'm forever saying to them, come on to tell your side of the story, to break that narrative down, so we understand what was it was like over in country. Because otherwise, you take those stories to the grave, and we don't have an understanding of what happened.
Right. I agree 100%.
Mm, mm.
Absolutely.
And mate, I've got a few final questions, and as I say, it's just been absolutely amazing with the time you've given me, Mike. And knowing what you know now, mate, and all that you've been through, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self, and would he listen?
He'd probably listen to me, but that wouldn't necessarily listen to any adult. I would say your aspirations are dead on target. And, yeah, it was awful. I wish I could bring back the folks that are gone, but it absolutely changed me as a person. And I'm far better today than I was as that 18-year-old kid. So, and I'm very thankful for that. Whether it was the leaders that I served under, the folks that I served with, the folks that supported me, you know, being around all those amazing people in that amazing unit, I can't say enough about it. I'm just very grateful for it.
No, it's mate, it's good advice to any young person out there that, just enjoy the journey. You're 18 once, and enjoy the journey, and maybe not be so fixated on the destination, because you learn so much about yourself as you have, mate, throughout your life. And you said it, you've been reborn, and this second phase of your life is you're really enjoying it. And mate, you're now a best-selling author. You're a keynote speaker, and you actually went into you had a bit of a dabble at politics, mate. What talk me through this and what that was like?
Yeah, I lost my mind, actually. Like, again, thinking about, is there something else for me to do here? I do think surviving something this traumatic causes you to wonder, what is my purpose? Why am I still here? Because the odds of this happening, I mean, I should have died 3 times in 10 minutes, and I did. And is there something that I should be doing? Can I contribute more? And with this story, and the reality is, if Black Hawk Down had never been written, or the movie never done, there wouldn't be nearly the recognition that there is on this story. But the reality is, it was written and the movie was done, and you still read about it or hear about it all the time. I mean, I don't know that I've listened to a podcast involving a military person in the special ops world that hasn't mentioned some aspect of Somalia or Black Hawk Down somewhere in their discussion. It was such a significant event in our community. Okay, now I lost where I was going. That doesn't happen very often.
It was so Somalia and Black Hawk, and then politics, and going into politics.
Politics. So what else am I supposed to do with this gift I've been given? And people had asked me over the years, you should run for office, yeah. And I always sort of blew it off. And then there was an opportunity to run for a U.S. Senate seat, which is, I mean, that's a long putt, as we say. That's a very significant. It's the most exclusive club in the world, as they call it. But I felt like I had a lot to offer. I mean, I had a full military career. I'd run my own business for 15 years, very successful in both. Our kids were all grown. I'm at a point where, I could really focus on doing a good job. And I was just naive. I didn't realize that there's some influencers out there that really kind of control how things go.
Hmm.
And I was too much of an unknown. I guess I would say that was what I didn't recognize, is that for those influencers to allow me to succeed was too risky from their perspective. That doesn't make what they did right,
No.
but that's, and in the end, I was ahead by double digits, probably going to win until they just came at me with everything that they had. And most of which was totally fabricated. Well, all of it was totally fabricated.
Mm.
Probably grounds for a lawsuit, honestly, but I just wanted to leave it behind. I didn't want to continue rehashing that, in a courtroom, and you know, I just was like, fine. If that's how this game is played,
Mm.
very painful,
It's a dirty game.
expensive lesson for me. It really is.
Mm.
And what was amazing to me is how easy it was to manipulate the vote with things that are patently false. I mean, just patently false. And if you spend enough money repeating the message, you're going to cause some people to flip, and they definitely did.
Mm, yeah, I know it out here too, Mike, that it's a very dirty game, and people have said it to me. Oh, you should go into politics. I said, nope, I will not sell my soul to the devil, mate. It is, yeah. I have too much self-respect for myself that I just will not go down that path. It's just, you've seen it, and I've seen it out here that it is just a very, very dirty game, and some people play it well, and as you want to change, Mike. And as you said, you would have offered a lot of, good, because I truly believe there are some politicians are good, and then there's some terrible politicians, and so so you have your little, dip your toes in the water for politics, and then you're not in politics, thank God, and so what are your plans now, mate, going forward with your family, and into the future?
Yeah, and I'll repeat what you just said. It's a blessing that I'm not there, because I would hate my life. I mean, I know I would, because I think the thing about it is, you almost can't be someone who consistently stands for something, and is truthful. It's almost like, you I don't know. I used to say, when people ask me if I want to run for something, I used to say, I can't stand the politics of business.
Mm,
There's no way I could live with the politics of politics. And I certainly learned that the hard way, that it was just, it's not for me.
mm.
So in terms of what am I doing now? Just staying busy. I skied today. I work out constantly, because, as you alluded to earlier, and a lot of folks that I'm in contact with recognize, if you want to live long, you got to stay active.
Mm.
You got to eat right. You got to stay intellectually stimulated. All of those things are all critical. Sleep, all critical in supporting your longevity. I've been climbing mountains. I said earlier, I ran the New York Marathon in November. And when you go from, I've been running, but to all of a sudden ramp up to be able to run 26 miles takes a lot of
Oh
time and effort
yeah.
to get that done. And like I said, my time was horrible, but I finished. And now I'm a world record holder, actually, because
Right.
in that race, they had more marathon finishers than any marathon in history. So we all share, me and 50,000 other people share the largest finishing group in marathon history, which I'm sure will be broken. But for now, we're all record holders.
Yeah, right. And mate, I know what that's like, because I this year, or sorry, last year, I ran the City to Surf. It's down here in Australia. Australian listeners know what it is, and I'd never run more than 10 Ks in my life, and to get to 14 and cross, mate, I didn't care what time I crossed that line. I was just like, I'm not stopping until I cross that line, we were raising funds for my brother and sister-in-law who had lost their baby stillborn. So we were running for a cause, and to get over that line, it was so emotional. And I know what it's like, mate. You've got to train up. You've got to build up to the. It's not just, oh, I'm going to run a marathon today, or I'm going to run 14 Ks. There's a lot of hard work that goes into it.
Especially when you're 64. The old
Yeah,
cardio system doesn't work like it did when you were in your 20s. It's just reality. But
absolutely.
the harder you work, the more you could put it off. So that's a lot of what I'm focused on right now.
Yeah, and spending time with obviously your family and your grandkids and watching hockey, mate. Lots of hockey.
Well, hockey and football, I enjoy watching both. And also, I serve on multiple nonprofit boards. They're not really, huge time consumers, but, I mean, you're on a call once a month or participating in an event here and there. And it's rewarding because you know that they're doing good things and it takes advantage of your contacts or your experiences that you have. So it's being applied in a positive way.
It's purpose. It's what you've spoken about throughout the whole podcast is that purpose is find, when you do transition, find that next purpose. Find, whether it be on those, non-for-profits or, whether it's going and feeding, the homeless at a homeless shelter or whatever it is, find that purpose because there's always a purpose in life and you've just got to find it.
Absolutely.
So, mate, I've got one final question before I wrap it up. And as I said, it's just been an absolute honor to have you on and with the time you've given. And mate, how do people contact you if they want to get in touch with you and talk to you about, if they might be struggling or they want to get you for a speaking event and where can they get your book?
Yeah, no, well, I'll start with the book. The book's kind of hard to find, actually, which is it's good if you're an author, right? If there's none out there available on the market, that's a good sign. So, the best is just to go on Amazon. You probably best thing you'll do is find a used one at this point. There might be a few new ones floating around, but they're really rare.
Mm,
In terms of contacting me, one thing I have avoided because I do think it's too much of a time suck and it's not generally positive for most people is social media. I just don't do it.
mm.
The only thing I have is LinkedIn and pretty easy to find on there. I don't even remember what my LinkedIn name is, but it's easy to find people on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And send a connection request, and I generally accept them. If it's a complete out of nowhere or something that I can't understand why this person would want to connect. I may go look at their profile and it's just a little bit of vetting, but I usually will accept and that's how a lot of folks get a hold of me if they want to.
Yeah, that's and mate, I like that the military's still in you of yeah, who is this person and who are they at face value and yeah, and mate, I'm sure you would get, a lot of people and that's how I connected with you through LinkedIn and then we got to chatting and then we've set this up. So yeah, no, great. Just I'm sure Mike, if you do reach out, he will, he did with me. Reach and we started a conversation and then that's how he has become the 160th person to be interviewed on the podcast and I think it's very fitting that he served in the 160th and he will be the 160th episode. So and that I don't know how that happened, Mike. It just happened by fluke. So and
Pretty cool.
absolutely. And mate, I'll finish with this. Mike, you've served your country with honour and brought pride to your family. Your story is one of true grit, resilience, and determination to have the courage to be brave and succeed at the elite level. And I really appreciate you coming on True Blue Conversations and sharing your story. It's been an absolute honour and a privilege to have you on. So thanks, Mike.
Well done, and I truly hope that there are folks out there that can benefit from the story and some of the lessons learned.
Absolutely, mate. And we'll stay in touch and I'll one day get over there and I would love to catch up and have a beer with you in person.
Oh, sounds great. Let me know when
Awesome.
you're here. All
Cheers.
right.
Thanks, mate.
Take care. Yep.
Thanks for listening to True Blue Conversations with your host, Adam Bloom. Real talk with those that pledge to keep us safe with grit, sacrifice, and determination. See you next time.